She was often referred to as Pollock's wife, but Lee Krasner was so much more than that. She was a pioneering force in abstract expressionism, one of the only women to be included in its inner circle. Her work spans decades and styles, constantly reinventing itself. She outlived many of her male peers, and yet, for too long, her legacy was overshadowed. This is the story of Lee Krasner, an artist who refused to be silenced. It's Laura here again. Welcome back to the channel and let's get into it. Born in Brooklyn, 1908 to Russian Jewish immigrant parents, Lena Krasner, she later changed the spelling of her name to Lee Krasner. Grew up in a Yiddish-speaking working-class household. Determined to become an artist, she studied at the Cooper Union and the National Academy of Design, but found those traditional institutions too rigid. She wanted something more radical. So in the 1930s, she joined the Works Progress Administration's Federal Art Project, a government-funded program that gave artists jobs during the Great Depression. She even led a mural team of 10 men, breaking gender norms in the process, and became a vocal member of the Artists' Union, fighting for artists' rights. The WPA was crucial for Krasner. It exposed her to modernist ideas, supported her financially, and connected her with other avant-garde artists. This was where her interest in abstraction deepened, and where she began moving away from academic realism. She also studied under Hans Hofmann, the influential German-American painter and teacher. Hofmann praised her work, but famously remarked, "This is so good. You wouldn't know it was done by a woman." Krasner never forgot that comment. In 1942, she met Jackson Pollock, a then unknown, intense young painter from Wyoming. They began a passionate, complicated relationship that would spark a major break in her work, Krasner's own term for a dramatic shift in style. That same year, she introduced Pollock to the gallerist Peggy Guggenheim, who would go on to sponsor his first solo show. It's a crucial moment in American art history, and Krasner was at the center of it. The couple married in 1945 and moved to Springs, East Hampton, where they set up studios in a farmhouse. While Pollock worked in the barn, Krasner used an upstairs bedroom. Unlike Pollock, Krasner constantly reinvented her style. She destroyed earlier works to make collages from their fragments. She worked in charcoal, in lush, earthy palettes, and later in shocking pinks and ochres, often painting in long, manic sessions through the night. Between 1946 and 1950, she developed her Little Images series, a breakthrough in her practice. These small, tightly composed paintings are rich in rhythm and texture, filled with repetitive marks, symbols, and gestural strokes that recall calligraphy or mosaics. Krasner often applied the paint directly from the tube, building dense, tactile surfaces. Despite their size, she viewed these paintings as a creative high point. At the same time, she began making collages from discarded fragments of her own and Pollock's paintings, reassembling failure into new forms. These works reflect her admiration for Matisse's cutouts and her belief in reinvention. While developing her own practice, Krasner also a tireless champion for Pollock's career. She introduced him to key figures like Willem de Kooning, Hans Hofmann, and the art dealer Sidney Janis. Most crucially, she brought critic Clement Greenberg into his orbit. Greenberg would become one of Pollock's greatest advocates. Despite her own ambitions, Krasner often put Pollock first, managing his work, his public image, and at times his emotional health. The relationship was tumultuous, creative, and eventually strained. In 1956, Jackson Pollock died in a car crash. Krasner was in Europe at the time. Though they had grown apart, Krasner was devastated. Some say she never fully recovered. But she stayed in Springs and began working in the barn studio that once had been Pollock's domain. There her art exploded in scale, energy, and emotional depth. Yet, in the years that followed, she produced some of her most powerful paintings. Her canvases grew monumental. The Seasons 1957 spanned 17 feet, a swirling dynamic expression of grief, rebirth, and life force. Gaea 1966 is one of her most commanding late works, a large-scale earthy abstraction named after the Greek goddess of the earth, with sweeping gestures and a palette of deep reds, whites, and ochres. The painting pulses with life and emotional intensity. It reflects her connection to nature, but also a sense of rebirth after loss. Gaea channels grief into strength, asserting Krasner's power as a force of nature in her own right. Despite her accomplishments, Krasner's recognition was long overdue, but by the 1960s and 70s, the tide began to turn. In 1965, she had her first solo show in Europe at the Whitechapel Gallery in London. In 1975, she was finally honoured with a major solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum in New York. Krasner's late career finally brought her long overdue recognition. In 1984, just months before her death, she became one of the few women ever given a retrospective at MoMA during her lifetime, and yet for decades her work was overlooked, often discussed only in relation to Pollock. But today that's changing. Exhibitions like Lee Krasner, Living Colour at the Barbican in London in 2019 have helped reintroduce her work to a new generation, not as a wife, not as a footnote, but as a leading figure in 20th century art. And in 2019, The Eye is the First Circle, a fierce swirling canvas from 1960, sold for over $11 million, setting a record for her work at auction. Lee Krasner was never interested in comfort. She tore up her own work to start over. She challenged gender roles. She pushed the boundaries of what painting could be, and she helped change the course of modern art. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning more about Lee Krasner's incredible life and work. Let me know in the comments which artist or designer you want me to cover next. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. See you on the next one. Bye!